What if the partner you trusted with your life erased himself from your memory? What if time travel was not just possible but absolutely necessary to save the world, and the only person who could do it was you? Welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving deep into one of the most underrated and emotionally rich entries in the Men in Black franchise, Men in Black 3. Men in Black 3 is an American science fiction action comedy film released in 2012. It is the third installment in the hugely popular Men in Black franchise, a series that began all the way back in 1997 and became one of the defining blockbuster franchises of the late 90s and early 2000s. The film was produced by Amblin Entertainment and released by Columbia Pictures, a division of Sony Pictures Entertainment. The budget for the movie was enormous, sitting at around $215 million, making it one of the more expensive productions of that year. The film was directed by Boris Sonnenfeld, the same director who helmed the first two films in the series, ensuring a consistent visual style and comedic tone throughout. Boris Sonnenfeld is known for his sharp eye for comedy and his ability to balance humor with spectacle, and Men in Black 3 is a perfect example of that skill set on full display. The screenplay was written by Etan Cohen, who crafted a story that does something quite bold. It takes the franchise in a new emotional direction by introducing time travel and using it not just as a plot device, but as a way to explore the relationship between the two lead characters in a much deeper and more meaningful way than either of the previous films attempted. What makes Men in Black 3 particularly interesting from a behind-the-scenes perspective is that the production was notoriously troubled. Filming began before the script was fully completed, leading to a production shutdown midway through shooting so that the story could be developed further. Despite these challenges, the final product came together as a surprisingly coherent and emotionally satisfying film, and it performed very well at the global box office, grossing over $624 million worldwide against its production budget. Section 2. Plot, full story breakdown. The story opens with a daring prison break at a maximum security lunar prison known as Arcanian. A dangerous alien criminal named Boris the Animal, played brilliantly by Jemaine Clement, escapes after years of imprisonment. Boris is one of the most feared beings in the galaxy, a savage and deeply vindictive alien who possesses a unique creature living inside his hand capable of shooting lethal spikes at enemies. His escape sets the entire plot into motion because Boris has one obsession above all else: revenge against the man who captured him and destroyed his arm, Agent K. Back on Earth, the movie introduces us to the familiar dynamic between Agent J, played by Will Smith, and Agent K, played by Tommy Lee Jones. Their partnership is as sharp and entertaining as ever, with J being the more expressive and emotionally open of the two, while K remains his typically stoic, cryptic, and emotionally distant self. J has always sensed that K is hiding something from him, some secret or emotional burden, but K never opens up, which has always been a quiet source of tension between them. Boris travels back in time to the year 1969 with the goal of killing the younger version of Agent K before he gets the chance to capture Boris in the first place. His plan works on a terrifying level. He succeeds in altering history, and the consequences ripple through time immediately. When Jay wakes up the next morning, Agent K no longer exists in the present timeline. Nobody at the Men in Black headquarters remembers him except Jay, who begins to notice that something is fundamentally wrong with reality. Earth is now under threat from Boris's alien species, the Boglodites, because in this altered timeline, the ArcNet shield, a device that K placed in orbit to protect Earth, was never deployed. Jay realizes he must travel back to 1969 to stop Boris from killing the younger K, and in doing so, restore the timeline and save the planet. He jumps off a skyscraper and uses a time jump device to land in New York City in 1969, just days before the Apollo 11 moon launch. In the past, Jay encounters the young Agent K, played with remarkable warmth and depth by Brolin, who delivers one of the most praised performances in the entire film. Young K is a very different man, warmer, more optimistic, more human, and their dynamic immediately becomes the emotional core of the film. Jay and young K team up to track down Boris in 1969 and prevent the assassination of young K. Along the way they encounter Griffin, a charming and quietly heartbreaking alien played by Michael Stuhlbarg, who possesses the ability to see all possible timelines simultaneously. Griffin carries the ArcNet device and knows that in only one possible version of events does everything go right. He is one of the most unique and affecting characters the franchise has produced. The final act of the film takes place at Cape Canaveral during the Apollo 11 launch. Jay and young K fight Boris at the rocket launch site, and in the climax, the ArcNet shield is successfully deployed. However, the emotional gut punch of the film arrives here. Colonel James Edwards Sr., Jay's father, arrives at the scene and is killed by Boris. Young K then steps in, uses the neuralizer on the young Jay, a child who has witnessed the entire event, and tells him that his father was a hero. This moment recontextualizes Jay's entire life and his relationship with K. The reason K has always been distant, cryptic, and protective of Jay is because he has been carrying the secret of Jay's father's heroic death all along. It is a genuinely moving and unexpected emotional resolution for the franchise. Josh Brolin's performance as young Agent K deserves special mention. He studied Tommy Lee Jones's mannerisms, vocal cadence, and physical presence in enormous detail and produced a performance so convincingly similar that critics and audiences alike praised it as one of the finest pieces of character mimicry in recent Hollywood history. It is a difficult thing to play a younger version of a character already established by another actor, and Brolin made it look completely effortless. Men in Black 3 was released in the United States on May 25, 2012. The date was strategically chosen to take advantage of the Memorial Day weekend box office, one of the most competitive and lucrative weekends of the summer movie season. The film opened to strong numbers and went on to become a genuine global box office success, ultimately grossing over $624 million worldwide. It performed particularly well in international markets, especially in China, where it was one of the first major Hollywood films to open simultaneously in IMAX format. Considering the troubled production, which included a significant filming hiatus and an incomplete script at the start of principal photography, the commercial and critical result was considered a major recovery. Most reviewers agreed that the film, while not quite matching the original 1997 classic in terms of charm and freshness, was a significant improvement over Men in Black 2 and a worthy and emotionally satisfying continuation of the story. Trailer and marketing. The marketing campaign for Men in Black 3 was extensive and cleverly designed. The first official trailer was released in late 2011 and immediately generated substantial excitement among fans of the franchise. The trailer successfully teased the time travel element without giving away the full emotional depth of the story, focusing instead on the action, the humor, and the nostalgia of seeing Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones back together on screen. Sony Pictures deployed a global marketing push that included viral online content, international press junkets, and a significant presence at major film events leading up to the release. The decision to release the film in IMAX was also a major part of the marketing strategy, positioning Men in Black 3 as a premium cinematic event rather than simply a sequel. The trailers were well received, and the use of Josh Brolin as young K became one of the most discussed and praised elements in the pre-release conversation about the film. Section 6. Legacy and Final Thoughts. Men in Black 3 occupies an interesting place in the franchise and in the broader landscape of Hollywood blockbusters from the early 2010s. It is a film that exceeded the expectations many had for it given the troubled production, and it did so by centering the story on something unexpected, genuine emotion. The revelation about Jay's father and Kay's long-held secret gives the film a weight that the previous sequels never attempted, and it makes the relationship between the two leads feel more meaningful and complete by the time the credits roll. Josh Brolin's performance remains the most talked about element of the film, and rightfully so. Michael Stuhlbarg's Griffin is a quietly beautiful creation, a character full of melancholy and wonder who speaks to the strange beauty of the universe in a way that is rare for a summer blockbuster. And Will Smith, despite this being one of his rare acting appearances of that period, reminded audiences why he was the biggest movie star in the world for so many years. Whether you are revisiting this film or watching it for the first time, Men in Black 3 is a reminder that even a franchise sequel burdened with production trouble can deliver something genuinely worthwhile when the right emotional core is found and followed through to its conclusion. A prison break on the moon. The story begins not on Earth, but far above it, at a maximum security prison called Lunarmax, orbiting the moon in complete isolation from the rest of the galaxy. It is a facility built specifically for the most dangerous alien criminals ever captured by the Men in Black, a secret government organization that polices extraterrestrial life on Earth and maintains the fragile peace between the human world and the countless alien species that live among us in disguise. Inside one of Lunarmax's cells, in total confinement, sits Boris the animal. He is a creature of immense and savage power, a member of a predatory alien species called the Boglodites, a race of parasitic beings that travel the galaxy consuming the resources of entire planets before moving on to the next. Boris is unlike any ordinary prisoner. He is ferocious, cunning, patient, and consumed by a singular, burning obsession that has kept him alive through decades of imprisonment: revenge. Boris lost his arm many years ago when he was captured and jailed by a Man in Black agent known as Agent K. He has never forgotten that moment. He has never forgiven it. Every single day inside Lunarmax, Boris has thought of nothing but the day he would escape and make K pay for what was done to him. And on this particular night, that day has finally arrived. A woman named Lily Poison arrives at the prison, smuggling a small alien creature inside her mouth that she passes to Boris during what appears to be a romantic visit. The creature is Boris's symbiotic weapon, a living, spike-launching organism that Boris keeps hidden inside his palm and uses as both a shield and a lethal projectile weapon. With it restored to him, Boris tears through the prison in a burst of spectacular, savage violence, killing guards and destroying everything in his path, until he blasts his way through the outer wall and is gone into the dark of space. He is free. And now his plan begins. Part 2. The world Jane knows, and the secret K carries. Back on Earth, in the underground headquarters of the Men in Black buried beneath a New York City street, life continues as usual. Alien activity is monitored, threats are neutralized, and the world continues to spin in complete ignorance of the fact that it shares its cities, neighborhoods, and subway cars with beings from across the universe. Agent J, real name James Darrell Edwards III, has been a Man in Black for over a decade at this point. He is sharp, fast-talking, quick on his feet, and one of the best field agents the organization has ever produced. But despite all of this, something has always nagged at him about his partner. Agent K is a wall. He is stone. He is a man who speaks as little as possible, shares nothing about himself, and maintains an emotional distance from J, and from everyone around him, that has always felt strange, almost deliberately cultivated, as though K is protecting some secret that he refuses to let out. J and K are dispatched to investigate a disturbance at a Chinese restaurant, a coded report about unusual alien activity. What they find there is one of Boris's escaped associates, a tentacled, wall-crawling alien who attacks them in the kitchen. They deal with it efficiently, but the encounter gives K a jolt of recognition. He knows what Boris's escape means. He knows what is coming. And rather than telling J anything, he goes quiet and withdraws further into himself, which frustrates J enormously. K goes home that night carrying the full weight of what he knows, standing alone in his apartment in the dark, aware of what Boris the animal's escape will mean for the future. He makes a phone call, a deeply personal one, that the audience only partially hears and does not yet understand. Then he goes to sleep, not knowing it is one of the last nights things will remain as they are. Part 3. History is rewritten. Kay vanishes from the world. Boris the animal has a plan that goes far beyond a simple assassination. He is going to travel back in time. Specifically, he is going to travel back to July 1969, to the days just before Apollo 11 launched from Cape Canaveral, because that is when and where a younger Agent K captured him, destroyed his arm, and sentenced him to 40 years in Lunamax. Boris intends to go back and kill young K before that moment can ever happen. He acquires a time jump device and leaps backward through the decades, landing in 1969 in a burst of temporal energy. From there he begins hunting the younger version of the man he hates more than anything in the universe. The consequences are immediate and total. When Jay wakes up the next morning in his apartment in New York City, something is deeply, profoundly wrong. The world feels off in a way he cannot immediately name. He goes to headquarters and discovers that nobody there seems to know who Agent K is. His desk is gone. His files do not exist. When Jay asks the current director of the Men in Black, played by Emma Thompson, about K, she responds with quiet sadness and tells Jay that K died in 1969. Jay is the only person on Earth who remembers that K ever existed. Because of his proximity to K at the moment the timeline shifted, Jay retained his original memories like an island in the middle of an altered sea. He is disoriented, frightened, and furious, but he knows with absolute certainty that something has gone catastrophically wrong with history. And then the situation gets worse. Without K alive in 1969 to deploy the ArcNet, a powerful protective shield that was placed into orbit around Earth following the events of that year, Earth has no defense against the Boglodites. Boris's species. In the altered timeline, the Boglodites have already begun approaching Earth, and it will be only hours before they arrive to strip the planet bare. The entire human race is about to be annihilated unless Jay can get back to 1969, stop Boris, make sure young K survives, and ensure that the ArcNet is deployed as it was originally supposed to be. Jay goes to a tech dealer, an eccentric, brilliant alien living in New York, and gets himself a time jump device. He is told that he needs to jump from an extreme height to achieve the necessary temporal velocity. Without hesitation, Jay takes the elevator to the top of the Chrysler Building, steps to the edge, and jumps. The world swirls and fractures around him as the decades peel back like paint in the wind, and then, with a crash, he lands in a dumpster in New York City in 1969. Part 4. 1969, a different New York, a different K. The New York City of 1969 is a vivid, disorienting contrast to the world Jay came from. The streets are different, the cars are different, the fashion is different, and, most significantly, the attitudes are different. Jay, a black man in 1969 America, immediately runs into the realities of the era when he is stopped and harassed by two white police officers who are suspicious of him simply for existing in the wrong place. The scene is played with a sharp, uncomfortable edge that the film does not soften or rush past. This is what it was like, and Jay knows it and feels it in a way that is entirely new for a Men in Black film. Jay eventually makes contact with the younger version of Agent K, and the difference is striking. Young K, played by Josh Brolin in a performance of extraordinary precision, is a man who still has warmth in him. He smiles. He is curious. He has an openness that his older self long ago buried under years of secrets and solitude. He is also skeptical, naturally, when a stranger appears claiming to be his future partner and telling him that an alien from the future has come back to kill him. But Jay manages to convince him, and together they begin working the case. Young K is simultaneously everything J always wished older K would be and a painful reminder of what older K lost somewhere along the decades. J finds himself watching young K with a kind of quiet grief, knowing that the person standing in front of him will eventually become the closed-off, distant man J has known his whole career, and not yet knowing why. They go first to a bowling alley, the front for a secret alien community in 1969. The alien informants there point them toward Coney Island, where Boris the animal has set up and is preparing to make his move. J and young K go to the boardwalk, engage Boris in a chase through the crowds and rides, and manage to corner him, but Boris slips away, and they realize the situation is more complicated than they thought. Boris is not acting alone. He is coordinating with his own past self, the 1969 version of Boris who has not yet been captured, creating a dual Boris threat that doubles the danger considerably. Part 5. Griffin, the alien who sees all possible futures. The key to everything, they learn, is a being named Griffin. Griffin is an Arcanian, a species with a singular, extraordinary, and deeply lonely ability. He can perceive all possible timelines simultaneously. At any given moment, Griffin exists in every version of events at once, seeing the infinite branching paths that stem from every decision, every coincidence, every breath. He is a being of profound sadness and strange joy, because he sees both all the beauty and all the tragedy that could happen, all at once, all the time. Griffin is also the keeper of the ArcNet, the shield that will protect Earth from the Boglodites. The device, the size of a small disk, has been entrusted to him because he is the only being who can navigate the infinite possible futures well enough to know when and how to deploy it correctly so that Earth survives. J and young K find Griffin at the 1964 World's Fair Pavilion, where he is sitting quietly and watching the universe unfold around him with an expression of serene, slightly melancholy wonder. He knows they are coming before they arrive. He knows what they need. He knows every possible outcome of this encounter, including the ones that end badly. Michael Stuhlbarg plays Griffin with a lightness and a depth that is unlike anything else in the film, a character who could easily have been a quirky plot device but becomes instead one of the most touching and memorable presences in the entire franchise. Griffin tells J and young K that there is one timeline, just one among the infinite, where everything goes right. Where Boris is stopped, where the ArcNet is deployed, where Earth survives. The path to that timeline is narrow and depends on events that seem impossibly small and random. A catch in a baseball game. A single decision made at the right moment. The miracle, Griffin tells them, is that these tiny things happen at all. Boris tracks them down and steals the ArcNet from Griffin in a confrontation that leaves J and young K regrouping and pursuing. The trail leads them all, inevitably, to Cape Canaveral, Florida, to the Apollo 11 launch site, because that is where and when the ArcNet must be deployed, attached to the rocket so it can be released into orbit the moment the launch reaches the right altitude. Part 6. Cape Canaveral, the final battle. The night before the Apollo 11 launch, the tension at Cape Canaveral is electric. The entire world is watching and waiting. This is one of the most significant moments in human history, the night before mankind steps onto the moon for the first time, and beneath the grandeur of that moment, in the shadows of the launch facility, a battle for the planet's survival is taking place that no human being is aware of. J and young K infiltrate the launch site with Griffin's help, racing against time to recover the ArcNet and get it attached to the rocket before Boris can prevent it. The two Borises, the one from the future and the original 1969 version, have joined forces, making them twice as lethal and twice as difficult to outmaneuver. Young K has to deal with the original Boris while J pursues the future one. The fight sequences at the launch site are thrillingly staged, full of momentum and physical danger, set against the enormous backdrop of the rocket gleaming in the floodlights, surrounded by scaffolding and machinery that turns the entire environment into a battlefield. Griffin watches from a distance, holding a nervous, pained expression as he cycles through futures, trying to hold on to the single thread that leads to the world surviving the night. Young K manages to defeat the original 1969 Boris, capturing him and shooting off his arm, the very moment that Boris the animal has spent decades hating K for, the wound that drove him to break out of prison and travel back through time to prevent. Young K deals with him precisely as history originally dictated, and in doing so ensures that the past remains intact. The future Boris, facing the collapse of his entire plan, is destroyed by J in a confrontation on the scaffolding of the launch tower. The ArcNet is attached to the rocket. The countdown reaches 0. Apollo 11 lifts off in a roar of fire and light, carrying the shield into orbit, where it deploys and wraps itself invisibly around the planet, protecting Earth from the Boglodites forever. The crisis is over. The timeline is restored. The world is saved, and nobody will ever know. Part 7. The truth about Jay's father, the emotional heart of the film. But the story is not quite finished. This is where Men in Black 3 does something that neither of its predecessors ever attempted. It stops being a blockbuster and becomes, for a few quiet, devastating minutes, a genuinely moving human story. In the aftermath of the battle, as the smoke clears around the launch site, a military vehicle pulls up and a colonel steps out to investigate the disturbance. The man is Colonel James Edwards Sr., and Jay recognizes him instantly with a shock that stops him cold. This is his father. A younger version of his father, alive and standing right in front of him, years before Jay was even born. Colonel Edwards is a strong, dignified, honorable man in a United States Army uniform. He has arrived because the commotion at the launch site triggered a military alert. He sees two men, young K and J, standing in the wreckage of what was clearly some kind of enormous confrontation, and he approaches with calm, professional authority, demanding an explanation. Young K speaks to him. He shows him his neuralizer. He prepares to wipe the colonel's memory of everything he has seen tonight, as protocol demands. But in the moment before he does, while Jay stands frozen a few feet away, watching his father in the flesh for the first time in his life, Boris the animal appears from the shadows. Not the future Boris. Not the 1969 Boris. A final, desperate attempt at revenge. Boris fires. Colonel Edwards Sr. steps in front of the shot, shielding young K with his body, and takes the lethal blow. He falls. Young K kills Boris once and for all. And then young K kneels beside the dying colonel and holds him as the life leaves him, while Jay stands watching from a distance, unable to interfere, tears in his eyes, helpless. Colonel James Edwards Sr. dies at Cape Canaveral on the night of July 15, 1969, the night before Apollo 11 launched. He dies a hero, protecting an agent of an organization he did not fully understand, in service of a world that would never know his sacrifice. Young K then does the most important and most painful thing he has ever done. He walks over to a small boy who has been sitting quietly in the back of the colonel's military vehicle the whole time, a little boy with wide, frightened eyes who has just watched his father die. Young K kneels down in front of the child. He holds the neuralizer up. And before he activates it, he looks the boy in the eyes and tells him, carefully, gently, with complete conviction, that his father was one of the bravest men he has ever met. That what happened tonight was not wrong or random, or meaningless. That his father was a hero. Then the neuralizer flashes. The boy's eyes clear. And young K tells him a story, a gentler story, a story a child can carry, so that instead of grief and trauma, the boy will grow up with something else. Pride. A sense that his father stood for something important, even if he cannot remember the specifics of what he witnessed tonight. The boy is young James Edwards. He is Jay. He is sitting right there, decades before he will grow up to become a man in black, watching his future partner hold his dying father. Jay watches all of this from a distance, and he understands everything. He understands why Kay has always been so protective of him. He understands the strange, quiet care that Kay has always shown for him beneath the stoic exterior. Kay has been carrying the secret of Jay's father's death for 40 years. Kay gave young Jay a reason to be proud of his origins on the night that everything could have broken him. And Kay never told Jay any of it, because that is the burden Kay chose to carry, alone, in silence, the way he carries everything. Part 8. The Return, What Jay Brings Back. Jay returns to the present. The timeline is whole again. Agent K exists once more, solid and real, sitting in headquarters exactly where he belongs. The world has no idea how close it came to ending. Humanity is having its morning coffee, reading its newspapers, walking its dogs, completely unaware that the night before, in 1969, two men in black and an alien who could see all possible futures fought to preserve the thread of history that allowed all of this ordinary beauty to continue. Jay walks into headquarters and sees Kay, and for a moment he just looks at him. He looks at him differently now. He sees not just the stoic, closed-off partner he has known for years, but the young man who knelt beside a dying colonel and told that man's small son that his father was brave. He sees the 40 years of weight that Kay has been carrying in silence. He sees the reason for all of it. Kay, of course, does not know that any of this just happened from Jay's perspective. To Kay, time simply continued as it always did. He has no memory of Jay's visit to 1969. He just sees his partner walk in and look at him with an expression he cannot quite read. Jay does not say anything about what he has learned. He does not confront Kay or demand answers or force the conversation that decades of his life have been building toward. Instead, he simply says something quiet and genuine, something that conveys, without spelling it out, that he understands Kay in a way he never did before. Kay absorbs this in the way Kay absorbs everything, with a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in his expression that, on Tommy Lee Jones's face, communicates an entire ocean of feeling. The film ends there. No grand speeches. No tearful reconciliation. Just two men who have known each other for a long time, standing in the same room, and one of them finally knowing the full truth of why the other has always been the way he is. Closing thoughts. What the story is really about. On the surface, Men in Black 3 is a science fiction action comedy about time travel, alien invasions, and the men in black saving the world. But underneath all of that, it is a story about fathers and sons. It is about the things that people carry in silence to protect the people they love. It is about how the most important acts of sacrifice and devotion are often the ones that go completely unseen, the ones where no credit is taken, no recognition is sought, and the only reward is knowing that someone else will be okay because of what you did. Agent K spent 40 years carrying the weight of Colonel Edwards's death and the secret of how Jay's father died as a hero. He never told Jay. He never asked for understanding or gratitude. He simply made sure, in every way he could, that Jay grew up to be someone his father would have been proud of, and then he stayed quiet about all of it. That is the real story of Men in Black 3. A story about a man who loved someone enough to carry a secret for 4 decades, and a son who finally, at the very end, understands who his father was and why his partner has always been the most loyal, most guarded, and most quietly devoted person in his life. It is a better film than it is usually given credit for, and its final 10 minutes are among the most emotionally honest and unexpectedly moving in the entire franchise's history. Josh Brolin. Young Agent K, 1969. Josh James Brolin was born on February 12, 1968, in Santa Monica, California, into one of Hollywood's most recognizable families. His father is James Brolin, the actor who built a long and distinguished career across film and television, and his mother was Jane Cameron Agee, a wildlife activist. His parents divorced when he was young, and his stepmother for many years was Barbra Streisand, who married his father in 1998, making Brolin's family connections to Hollywood royalty essentially inescapable. Despite this, Brolin himself has spoken often about how he did not trade on his father's name, and in many ways actively avoided it, choosing to build his career on his own terms and through his own persistent, sometimes difficult journey. Brolin grew up partly in the San Fernando Valley and partly on a ranch in Templeton, California, where his family moved for a period during his teenage years. Living on a ranch gave him an understanding of physical work, animals, and the rhythms of rural life that fed into many of his later performances. He was not an easy, compliant teenager. By his own account, he ran with a crowd that could have led him somewhere very bad. He has spoken about brushes with gangs and dangerous situations during his adolescence, and it was largely chance and a few key decisions that led him away from that path and toward acting. He made his professional acting debut on the television series The Young Riders in 1989, playing James Butler Hickok, Wild Bill Hickok, in a role he held for 3 seasons until 1992. The show was a Western drama that gave Brolin sustained experience in front of a camera and helped him develop the physical confidence and economy of movement that would define his best performances. He appeared in a scattering of films and television productions through the 1990s, working steadily but without achieving any major breakout moment for many years. There were periods of frustration, periods of personal difficulty, and a general sense that his career was moving more slowly than his talent perhaps deserved. Everything changed in 2007, when Brolin delivered 2 performances in a single year that permanently reframed his place in Hollywood. The first was in Robert Rodriguez's Planet Terror, part of the Grindhouse double feature, where he played a menacing, disturbed villain with total commitment. The second, and the one that changed his life, was in No Country for Old Men, the Cohen brothers' adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's novel. Brolin played Llewellyn Moss, an ordinary man who finds a suitcase full of money at the scene of a drug deal gone wrong and is subsequently hunted across Texas by the terrifying Etan Sugar. His performance was quiet, grounded, and utterly convincing, the kind of acting that makes you forget you are watching acting at all. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Brolin's performance was widely praised as one of the most essential elements of its success. He followed that with Milk in 2008, playing Dan White, the man who assassinated Harvey Milk, in a performance of controlled, frightening psychological intensity that earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. In the same year he played George W. Bush in Oliver Stone's W., an extraordinarily difficult assignment that required him to inhabit one of the most recognized and divisive public figures in recent American history, and he did so with a complexity and humanity that surprised critics who expected simple caricature. In the space of about 12 months, Brolin had gone from a respected working actor to one of the most in-demand performers in Hollywood. His performance, as young Agent K in Men in Black 3, is widely considered one of the most technically impressive things he has done. The challenge was enormous. He had to play a younger version of a character already established and beloved in Tommy Lee Jones's specific, idiosyncratic interpretation, and he had to do it in a way that felt believable as the same person without ever tipping into simple imitation or parody. Brolin studied Jones obsessively, watching interviews, studying his mannerisms, breaking down the cadences of his voice, the way he holds his body, the particular quality of stillness he projects. The result was a performance that felt miraculous to audiences and critics alike, recognizably K, but warmer, younger, and carrying none of the decades of emotional armor that Jones's version had accumulated. In the years after Men in Black 3, Brolin continued to build one of the most impressive careers in contemporary Hollywood. He played Thanos, the primary villain of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in Avengers, Infinity War and Avengers, Endgame, a role that required him to perform almost entirely through motion capture and voice work, and yet he managed to make Thanos one of the most fully realized and philosophically complex antagonists in superhero film history. He also played Cable in Deadpool 2 and portrayed the gunfighter Rooster Cogburn in a fashion entirely his own in True Grit. His personal life included 2 divorces and a period of very public personal difficulties, including a DUI arrest in 2013, but he has spoken openly about the work he has done to understand himself better and build a more stable life, and he married actress Catherine Boyd in 2016, with whom he has 2 children. Jemaine Clement. Boris the Animal. Jemaine Adia Mahana Clement was born on January 10, 1974, in Masterton, New Zealand, a small city in the Wairarapa region on the North Island. He is of Maori descent through his mother's side of the family. His iwi, or tribal affiliation, is Ngāroru, and grew up in a New Zealand that was culturally very different from the global entertainment landscape he would eventually become part of. He studied at Victoria University of Wellington, where he met the people who would become his closest creative collaborators, including Taika Waititi, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated filmmakers of his generation, and Brett McKenzie, with whom Clement would form the musical comedy duo that made him internationally famous. Clement and McKenzie formed Flight of the Conchords, a comedy folk duo that performed at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe and various comedy festivals through the early 2000s, building a dedicated following through their absurdist, deadpan, musically sophisticated humor. Their personas as 2 hapless New Zealanders trying and largely failing to make it as musicians in New York became the basis for an HBO television series that ran from 2007 to 2009. The show Flight of the Conchords was a critical sensation, winning multiple Emmy Awards and developing a cult following that extended far beyond the usual boundaries of music comedy. Clement's timing, his ability to maintain a perfectly straight face through increasingly surreal situations, and his genuine musical ability — he is a skilled guitarist and has a rich, sonorous singing voice — made him one of the most distinctive comic performers of his era. His film work began expanding beyond the comedic during this period, and Men in Black 3 in 2012 represented a significant departure into mainstream Hollywood villainy. His performance as Boris the Animal was a genuine physical and vocal transformation. He spent time in makeup that altered his appearance substantially, developed a voice and physicality for Boris that was entirely separate from anything he had done before, and played the character with a ferocity and menace that demonstrated his range extended well beyond the gentle absurdism of his Flight of the Conchords persona. The character was memorable, funny in the darkest possible way, and genuinely threatening, a difficult combination to pull off, and Clement did it with evident relish. His career has continued to expand in interesting directions. He appeared in the critically acclaimed New Zealand mockumentary What We Do in the Shadows in 2014, written and directed by Taika Waititi, which he also co-wrote, playing an ancient vampire named Vladislav with aristocratic pretensions and a complicated romantic history. The film spawned a successful American television series adaptation, and Clement has remained involved in the broader What We Do in the Shadows universe in various capacities. He also voiced the villain Tamatoa, a giant glittering coconut crab, in Disney's animated film Moana in 2016, delivering one of the film's most entertaining sequences with a theatrical, self-obsessed villain song that became a genuine fan favorite. He has continued working across film, television, and comedy in both New Zealand and internationally, remaining one of the most genuinely singular and difficult to categorize talents in contemporary entertainment. Emma Thompson. Agent O. Emma Thompson was born on April 15, 1959, in Paddington, London, England, into a theatrical family that made her immersion in performance almost inevitable. Her father, Eric Thompson, was an actor and director who became enormously well known in Britain as the creator and narrator of The Magic Roundabout, a beloved children's television program. Her mother, Phillida Law, is a highly respected actress who has worked continuously in film, television, and theater across a long and distinguished career. Thompson grew up surrounded by artists and storytellers, in a household where creativity and performance were simply the currency of everyday life. She was educated at Camden School for Girls before winning a place at Newnham College, Cambridge, one of the historically women-only colleges at Cambridge University, where she studied English literature. At Cambridge she became an active member of the Cambridge Footlights, the legendary university comedy club that has produced an extraordinary number of the most significant British comedians and performers of the 20th century, including John Cleese, Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, and countless others. Thompson was one of the first women to be elected president of the Footlights, a distinction that reflected both her talent and the cultural shifts taking place within the institution at that time. She performed in Cambridge Footlights revues that toured internationally, and these years of live comedy performance gave her a foundation in timing, precision, and the management of an audience that informed her acting for the rest of her career. After Cambridge she worked in theatre and began appearing in British television productions, gradually building a reputation as one of the most gifted actors of her generation. Her breakthrough at a wider level came through her association with the director and actor Kenneth Branagh, whom she married in 1989. Together they made several films, most notably the 1989 adaptation of Henry V, in which Branagh directed and starred, and the 1993 adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing, in which both performed. Their partnership was one of the most celebrated creative collaborations in British cinema of that period, though their marriage ended in 1995. Thompson won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1993 for her role in Howard's End, playing Margaret Schlegel, a performance of extraordinary intelligence and emotional precision that established her as not merely a good actress but one of the very best working anywhere in the world at that time. A year later, she won a second Academy Award, this time for Best Adapted Screenplay, for her script for Sense and Sensibility, becoming the only person in history to have won Academy Awards for both acting and writing. She also starred in that film, playing Eleanor Dashwood with a restraint and depth that critics considered one of the finest performances of the decade. The double win was a landmark achievement that cemented her reputation as a uniquely multi-talented figure in cinema. Her subsequent career has ranged across comedy, drama, and everything in between. She played the warmly terrifying Professor Sybil Trelawney in the Harry Potter film series. She was magnificent as the conflicted author P.L. Travers in Saving Mr. Banks, a performance that many felt deserved more awards attention than it received. She wrote and starred in the British comedy series Derry Girls. No, that is incorrect, she did not appear in that. But she did write and star in the acclaimed film The Tall Guy, and continued to produce work of consistent quality and intelligence. She has also been an outspoken public figure on issues ranging from climate change to the treatment of women in the entertainment industry, and she has a reputation for combining extraordinary professional accomplishment with a warmth, humor, and groundedness that makes her one of the most universally liked figures in British public life. Michael Stuhlbarg. Griffin the Arcanian. Michael Stuhlbarg was born on July 5, 1968, in Long Beach, California. He grew up in a Jewish family and from a relatively early age showed a serious interest in performance and the arts. He studied at UCLA before earning a place at the Juilliard School in New York City, which is widely regarded as one of the finest conservatories for dramatic training in the United States and has produced an extraordinary number of the most distinguished stage and screen actors of the past several decades. The training at Juilliard is rigorous, classical, and deeply rooted in theatrical tradition, and it gave Stuhlbarg a technical foundation and a relationship to language and physical expression that has informed everything he has done since. After Juilliard, Stuhlbarg threw himself into the New York theater world with complete commitment. He spent years doing stage work, off-Broadway, off-Broadway, and eventually Broadway productions, building a reputation as one of the finest stage actors in New York, the kind of actor that other actors went to see and talked about in reverent terms. He won a Tony Award for Best Actor in a Play in 2008 for his performance as Richard Roma in a revival of David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross, a play that is considered one of the most demanding and rewarding challenges in the American theatrical canon. His work in that production was considered definitive by many who saw it. His film career took off in a significant way with A Serious Man in 2009, the Cohen brothers' deeply personal and philosophically searching film about a Jewish physics professor in 1960s Minnesota whose life begins to unravel in ways he cannot understand or control. Stuhlbarg played Larry Gopnik with a performance of such raw, bewildered, searching humanity that the film, which might otherwise have been seen as a niche, esoteric work, became something universally resonant. The Cohen brothers, who are not known for lavish praise of their collaborators, have spoken about Stuhlbarg with evident admiration, and his work in that film remains one of the most quietly astonishing acting performances in American cinema of the past 20 years. Men in Black 3 gave him an entirely different kind of challenge, a supporting role in a massive Hollywood blockbuster where he played Griffin, an alien with the ability to see all possible timelines. What could have been a purely expository function in lesser hands became, in Stuhlbarg's, a genuinely moving and otherworldly performance. He brought to Griffin a quality of serene, slightly heartbroken wonder that was entirely unique to him, the sense of a being who sees too much, feels too much, and has learned to hold all of it with a kind of bittersweet acceptance. It was the kind of performance that made the film significantly better than it might otherwise have been, and it demonstrated Stuhlbarg's ability to bring genuine depth to work that does not necessarily demand it. The years following Men in Black 3 brought some of Stuhlbarg's most remarkable work. He appeared in Call Me by Your Name in 2017, directed by Luca Guadagnino, in a relatively small but absolutely devastating role as the father of Elio, the young man at the center of the film's story. His final speech to his son, a monologue about love and suffering and the importance of feeling everything fully even when it hurts, became one of the most discussed and celebrated scenes of that entire year of cinema. He also appeared in The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro's Academy Award-winning fantasy film, and in Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans. He has built a body of work that is as quietly distinguished and consistently excellent as that of almost any actor working today, and he remains somewhat underappreciated by the general public relative to the esteem in which he is held by his peers, critics, and directors. Men in Black 3 is one of the most expensive films ever made, and the story of how its budget ballooned to the level it did is almost as dramatic as the film itself. The production was greenlit by Sony Pictures and producer Walter Parkes at a time when the Men in Black franchise was still considered one of the most reliable brands in Hollywood, and the initial budget projections were ambitious but manageable for a major summer tentpole release. What nobody fully anticipated was how much the production would cost once the behind-the-scenes chaos truly set in. The most significant financial problem the film faced was one that is almost unheard of at this scale in the modern studio system. Principal photography began before the screenplay was finished. This was not a case of minor script adjustments or polishing dialogue on set, which is common enough in Hollywood. The script was genuinely incomplete when cameras started rolling in New York City in the summer of 2011. Key story elements had not been resolved. Major plot decisions had not been made. The ending of the film, the crucial emotional revelation about Agent J's father, had not yet been written when they began shooting the earlier parts of the story. The reason this happened is somewhat complicated. Will Smith, whose involvement was the absolute cornerstone of the entire production, was unwilling to commit to a script he was not satisfied with, and he had enough power within the Hollywood system, and enough leverage given that the franchise essentially could not exist without him, to make that refusal stick. The studio, desperate to keep the film on schedule for its summer 2012 release window, made the decision to begin production anyway, with the belief that the script issues would be resolved in the early weeks of filming. They were not resolved in the early weeks. The production shut down entirely in September 2011 after approximately 2 months of filming. The cast and crew were paid for the hiatus. Sets that had already been built were maintained. Equipment was kept on hold. New York City locations that had been contracted were renegotiated. The shutdown lasted several weeks and is estimated to have cost Sony Pictures somewhere in the region of $1 to $2 million per day in carrying costs alone, on top of everything that had already been spent. By the time the production resumed and filming was completed, the budget had escalated dramatically from its original projections. Columbia Pictures, Sony's film division, classified the exact final budget in several different ways across different financial documents, but the most widely reported and accepted figure is approximately $215 million for production alone, a number that does not include the marketing and distribution costs, which are estimated to have added another $100 million on top of that, bringing the total cost to Sony to somewhere in the range of $315 million by the time the film opened in theaters in May 2012. The money went into a number of very specific places. The New York City production was extensive and complex, involving location shoots across the city including sequences in Coney Island, various Manhattan streets, and the underground headquarters sets that were built at Steiner Studios in Brooklyn. The 1969 period sequences required an enormous amount of production design work: cars, costumes, set dressing, extras and period-appropriate clothing, all recreating New York City at the end of the 1960s with convincing detail. The visual effects budget was substantial, with hundreds of shots involving alien creatures, the time jump sequences, the lunar prison break, the Apollo 11 launch sequence, and the Bogladite invasion in the altered timeline. Will Smith's salary for the film was reported to be in the range of $100 million, which if accurate would represent one of the largest individual actor payments in Hollywood history for a single film. The figure has never been officially confirmed by either Smith or Sony, but multiple industry sources reported numbers in that range, and it is consistent with Smith's market value at the time. He had a long-established deal structure with Sony that gave him a percentage of the film's gross profits in addition to a significant upfront fee. Tommy Lee Jones and Josh Brolin were paid at significantly lower rates, as befits their supporting roles, though both received very comfortable fees for a major studio production. Despite all of this financial turbulence, the film got made, got finished, got released on time, and performed well enough to justify its own existence. Sony declared it a success. Will Smith declared it a success. The audience largely agreed. And the story of how a $215 million movie was built on a foundation of an unfinished script and an enormously expensive gamble taken by a studio that believed in its star became one of the most talked about production tales in Hollywood that year. Part 2. Funny moments on set. What really happened behind the camera. Josh Brolin doing Tommy Lee Jones impressions to his face. The most frequently told and most genuinely entertaining story from the set of Men in Black 3 involves Josh Brolin and the preparation he did for his role as young Agent K. Brolin spent weeks studying Tommy Lee Jones, watching interviews, studying his body language, breaking down his vocal patterns, practicing the specific cadence of Jones's speech and the particular way Jones holds tension in his face and jaw. By the time filming began, Brolin had the impression down to a remarkably precise degree. What made this hilarious on set was that the two men were often filming at the same location or in proximity to each other, and there were multiple occasions where Brolin would slip into his Jones impression mid-conversation, not as a joke but simply because he had been living in the character's skin so long that it came out naturally. Tommy Lee Jones, by all accounts, found this deeply unsettling in a way that he expressed not through laughter but through long, hard, unblinking stares. Jones is not a man who responds to being mimicked with warm amusement. He responded with the face of a man trying to decide whether to be offended or impressed, and that expression, which sits precisely between those two states, apparently became one of the funniest recurring images on the entire production. Will Smith, who was present for several of these encounters, reportedly could not keep a straight face and had to walk away from the scene on multiple occasions. Will Smith and the neuralizer pranks. Will Smith is by wide reputation one of the most energetic, playful, and genuinely funny presences on any film set he has ever worked on. His approach to the long days and occasional tedium of filmmaking is to keep the energy up through humor, and on Men in Black 3 he was reportedly in particularly good form. One of his favorite running jokes on set involved the neuralizer prop, the silver memory wiping device that is central to the Men in Black mythology, which he would produce at random moments during breaks in filming and point at crew members, directors of photography, producers, and anyone else who happened to be in the vicinity, announcing in his best Agent J voice that whatever conversation was about to happen or whatever mistake had just been made would be dealt with by means of a memory wipe. He reportedly used this bit to defuse tense moments on set when the pressure of the production, particularly during the shutdown period, began to get to people, and it worked well enough that crew members started anticipating it and playing along rather than groaning at the repetition. Jemaine Clement's costume and the chair problem. Playing Boris the animal required Jemaine Clement to spend an extraordinary amount of time in the makeup chair every single filming day. The prosthetics and makeup required to transform Clement, a tall, gangly, warm-featured New Zealander with a gentle comedic energy, into the savage, scarred, physically imposing Boris the animal took somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 hours each morning. This means that on a typical shooting day, Clement was in the makeup chair before most of the rest of the cast had even arrived on set. The humor came from the profound contrast between what Boris the animal looks like, terrifying, ancient, brutal, and what Jemaine Clement is actually like, which by all accounts is charming, self-deprecating, slightly awkward in a specifically New Zealand way, and prone to making quiet, dry, extremely funny observations about his surroundings. Crew members and castmates reported that the experience of watching Clement sit in full Boris makeup and prosthetics, looking like the most frightening thing in the galaxy, while delivering gentle, understated commentary about the catering or the weather or the discomfort of the makeup chair was one of the most surreal and consistently amusing experiences of the entire production. Director Barry Sonnenfeld has spoken about how walking into the makeup trailer in the early morning and finding Jemaine Clement sitting there in full alien horror makeup, holding a cup of tea and chatting pleasantly about nothing in particular, never stopped being funny no matter how many times it happened. Michael Stuhlbarg knowing too many timelines. Michael Stuhlbarg, who played Griffin the timeline seeing Arcanian, threw himself into the logic of his character's ability with a thoroughness that became something of a running joke among the cast and crew. Griffin can see all possible timelines simultaneously, every version of every event, every potential outcome of every decision, and Stuhlbarg took this seriously enough that he would occasionally, between takes, begin narrating alternative versions of whatever was happening on set at that moment. If a prop fell over, Stuhlbarg might quietly observe that in 47 of the possible timelines the prop remained upright, and in 12 of them it fell in a slightly different direction, and in one particularly improbable timeline Will Smith caught it with his left hand. Will Smith reportedly found this deeply enjoyable and encouraged Stuhlbarg to keep going, which meant that Griffin's timeline narration occasionally extended through entire lunch breaks. The Coney Island crowd and the alien extras. Filming at Coney Island in Brooklyn for the 1969 sequence required the production to fill the boardwalk and fairground with period-appropriate extras. Hundreds of people were cast, costumed, and positioned across the location to recreate the look of Coney Island at the end of the 1960s. Among these extras were a number of actors in alien creature makeup and prosthetics, beings who were supposed to be part of the alien community living undercover at the fairground. The combination of hundreds of costumed period extras and a scattering of alien creatures wandering around among them created a visual that was deeply strange even by the standards of a Men in Black production. What made it genuinely funny was the reaction of actual members of the public who wandered close enough to see what was happening during filming. New York City is not a place where people are easily surprised, and New Yorkers generally pride themselves on not reacting to unusual things they see in public. But even by New York standards, a crowd of people dressed in 1969 clothing interspersed with alien monsters at Coney Island was enough to stop pedestrians dead in their tracks. Barry Sonnenfeld has told the story of watching a man in his 70s who had presumably seen everything New York had to offer simply stand on the edge of the shoot location for 20 minutes in complete silence, not asking questions, not taking photographs, just staring at the alien extras with an expression of profound philosophical adjustment, before eventually turning and walking away without a word. Tommy Lee Jones and the script pages. Because the screenplay was being written and revised throughout production, there were multiple occasions where cast members received new pages of script the night before or even the morning of the day they were scheduled to shoot those scenes. This is stressful for any actor, but it was particularly notable in the case of Tommy Lee Jones, who is known for his extreme seriousness about preparation and his expectation that everything on a film set will be organized and professional. Receiving new script pages at 6 in the morning for scenes you are shooting at 9 is the opposite of organized and professional. Jones's response to this situation, according to multiple crew members who were present, was to say nothing at all. He would receive the new pages, read them with an expression of absolute stone-faced inscrutability, fold them neatly, put them in his pocket, and then deliver the lines perfectly when the time came. He never complained about it out loud. He never expressed frustration to the director or the producers. He simply processed whatever was given to him and made it work. The crew found this somehow more intimidating than if he had complained loudly, because the total absence of any visible reaction to something objectively stressful made it impossible to know what he was thinking, and the uncertainty was funnier and more nerve-wracking than any outburst would have been. Will Smith's on-set DJ setup. One of the most beloved aspects of Will Smith's presence on any film set is his music. Smith has maintained his identity as a musician and a man who processes the world through rhythm and sound, and on Men in Black 3 he reportedly brought a substantial speaker setup that was installed in whatever space was designated as his trailer or holding area. Between takes, music was a constant. He would emerge from filming a scene, return to his area, and the music would be going. Cast and crew members have described the atmosphere around Smith's part of the set as significantly louder and more energetic than the rest of the production, and people gravitated there during breaks because the energy was better. The funny aspect was the contrast this created with Tommy Lee Jones's energy, which was the precise opposite: quiet, contained, private. The two men have genuinely complementary temperaments in real life, just as their characters do on screen, and the dynamic of Will Smith's area of the set being essentially a party, and Tommy Lee Jones's area being somewhere you spoke in a respectful murmur was a real thing that people noticed and found amusing. Josh Brolin, who was positioned between these two poles as the new addition to the partnership, has described navigating the social geography of the Men in Black 3 set as one of the more entertaining challenges of his professional life. Cultural and historical context of Men in Black 3. Chapter 1. The Apollo 11 moon landing. Why 1969 was the perfect setting. The decision to set the 1969 sequences of Men in Black 3 around the Apollo 11 mission was not accidental or merely convenient. It was a deliberate and deeply considered creative choice that gave the entire film a historical anchor of extraordinary weight. Apollo 11 launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, on July 16, 1969, and on July 20 of that same year Neil Armstrong became the first human being to walk on the surface of the moon. It remains one of the most singular achievements in the history of civilization, a moment when the human species did something that had been considered impossible, poetic, or purely mythological for the entirety of recorded history before that point. The filmmakers understood that by setting the climax of Men in Black 3 at the Apollo 11 launch site, they were doing something more than simply using a recognizable historical backdrop. They were inserting the Men in Black universe into the most watched and most universally meaningful moment of the 20th century, and in doing so they were making a statement about the relationship between human achievement and the secret world of alien life that the MIB exists to manage. The implication is that one of the most important nights in human history was also, quietly and invisibly, one of the most important nights in the history of Earth's relationship with the wider galaxy, the night the ArcNet shield was deployed, the night the planet was protected from the Boglodites, the night that made every subsequent moment of human progress possible. There is something genuinely moving about this idea when you sit with it. The entire population of Earth watched the Apollo 11 launch with a sense of collective wonder and pride. They thought they were watching human beings reach for the stars. They were right. But they had no idea that attached to that rocket, invisible and unannounced, was a device that would protect their planet from an alien predator species that would otherwise have consumed it. The grandeur of the historical moment becomes even grander in the film's universe, and yet that extra layer of grandeur is one that no human being except a handful of men in black agents will ever know about. The production design team worked extensively to recreate Cape Canaveral in 1969 with as much accuracy as possible. The Saturn V rocket that launched Apollo 11 was one of the largest and most powerful machines ever built by human beings, 363 feet tall, weighing 6.2 million pounds at launch, and producing 7.6 million pounds of thrust from its first-stage engines. Recreating the visual presence of that rocket, even in part, required significant work from the visual effects and production design departments, and the film treats the launch itself with a reverence that reflects a genuine understanding of what it represented. The year 1969 also carries enormous cultural and political significance beyond the moon landing, and the film is aware of this context even when it does not address it directly. America in 1969 was a country in the middle of one of the most turbulent and transformative periods in its history. The Vietnam War was at its most controversial and divisive. The civil rights movement had just experienced both its greatest legislative victories and its most devastating losses, including the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. the previous year. The counterculture was at its peak. The generation that grew up after World War II was in open rebellion against the values and structures of the generation that preceded it. Into all of this historical turbulence, the film drops Agent J, a black man from the 21st century, and observes, with a sharp and uncomfortable honesty, what it would actually mean to be that person in that time. Chapter 2. Race in America, the film's most honest historical conversation. One of the most culturally significant things Men in Black 3 does, and one that is not always given sufficient credit in discussions of the film, is its unflinching engagement with what it would actually mean for a black man to travel back to America in 1969. The film does not pretend that Jay arrives in a neutral or welcoming environment. It does not soften or skip over the realities of racial segregation, discrimination, and the everyday indignities and dangers that black Americans faced in that era. The sequence where Jay arrives in 1969 New York and is immediately stopped by two white police officers is one of the most pointed and uncomfortable scenes in the entire Men in Black franchise. The officers are not cartoonishly villainous. They are simply men of their time, operating within the assumptions and prejudices of the society that shaped them, who see a black man in the wrong place and respond with suspicion and authority. Jay, who in his own time is a senior federal agent with the full authority of the United States government behind him, suddenly finds himself in a situation where none of that matters, where his professional identity, his competence, and his status mean absolutely nothing because the men in front of him see only his skin color and respond accordingly. The scene is played with a deftness that walks a difficult line. It is uncomfortable enough to be honest about what it is depicting, but it does not derail the film or turn it into something other than what it is. Will Smith plays Jay's reaction with a mixture of resignation, frustration, and a dark humor that comes from someone who understands the historical context of what is happening to him even if the men doing it do not. He uses his MIB equipment to defuse the situation, but not before the film has made its point clearly and without apology. 1969 America was a dangerous place for a black man, and no amount of time travel adventure framing changes that fundamental reality. This aspect of the film connects to a broader cultural conversation about the relationship between Black Americans and American institutions, a conversation that was particularly resonant at the time of the film's release in 2012, during the presidency of Barack Obama, the first Black president of the United States. The film was released in a moment when America was simultaneously celebrating historic progress in racial equality and confronting the persistent reality of racial inequality in its institutions, particularly in law enforcement. The scenes of Jay navigating 1969 America as a black man carried a weight that audiences in 2012 recognized immediately, because the underlying dynamics being depicted were not purely historical. The film goes further with the character of Colonel James Edwards Sr., Jay's father. Here is a black man in 1969 who is a United States Army officer, a figure of dignity, authority, and honor in a system that was still deeply hostile to black advancement. His presence at Cape Canaveral during the Apollo 11 launch places him in the heart of one of the most significant moments of American national pride, and his willingness to sacrifice his life to protect young Kay, a white MIB agent he has just met, is the film's most powerful statement about the character of a certain kind of American patriotism. He dies serving a cause he was never fully told about, protecting a country that did not yet fully recognize his humanity, and he does it without hesitation. The film treats his sacrifice with the full weight it deserves, and in doing so makes a quietly profound statement about the unrecognized contributions of Black Americans to the story of the nation throughout its history. The revelation at the end of the film, that Agent K has been carrying the secret of Colonel Edwards's death and protecting his son for 40 years, reframes the entire franchise through this lens. Kay's devotion to Jay is not merely professional loyalty or personal affection. It is an act of honoring a debt to a man who gave everything for a country and a cause that asked everything of him and acknowledged nothing. Chapter 3. The Cold War, the Space Race, and America's Hidden History. The 1969 setting of Men in Black 3 places the film squarely within the context of the Cold War and the space race, two of the defining geopolitical dynamics of the 20th century. The space race was the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union to achieve supremacy in space exploration, and it was fueled not merely by scientific curiosity but by the ideological rivalry between two superpowers who saw the conquest of space as an extension of their struggle for global dominance. The Apollo 11 moon landing was the definitive American victory in this competition, the moment when the United States conclusively demonstrated that its technological and organizational capabilities exceeded those of the Soviet Union in the most dramatic possible arena. Within the Men in Black universe, the space race takes on an entirely different meaning. The frantic human effort to reach the moon, the enormous expenditure of resources, the years of engineering effort, the loss of life and accidents and disasters along the way, was not merely a geopolitical competition. It was, from the MIB's perspective, a race to get a specific payload into orbit at a specific moment, because that payload was the ArcNet shield, and without it the planet was defenseless. The implication is that the Men in Black were using the space race, using the geopolitical competition between two superpowers and the enormous resources that competition generated, as a delivery mechanism for alien technology that would protect the Earth. NASA, in this reading, was not merely a scientific organization or a national prestige project. It was, unknowingly, an instrument of planetary defense. This is a genuinely clever piece of world-building that gives the historical events of 1969 a new layer of meaning within the film's universe. It also connects to the broader Men in Black mythology, which has always been built around the idea that the most significant events in human history have alien dimensions that the general public is unaware of. The assassination of President Kennedy, the Roswell incident, the development of various technologies, All of these have been referenced in various Men in Black materials as events that involved alien influence or intervention of some kind. Men in Black 3 adds the Apollo 11 mission to this catalog of secretly alien-inflected human history, and it does so in a way that feels organic and emotionally resonant rather than simply clever. The cultural memory of the space race also carries a specific quality of optimism and collective purpose that the film draws on deliberately. 1969 was, in many respects, a year of profound national and international pain, full of war, political violence, social upheaval, and the shattering of the optimism that had characterized the early part of the decade. The moon landing was one of the few things that cut across all of these divisions and gave people, briefly, a sense of shared human achievement that transcended national and political boundaries. By setting its climax at the Apollo 11 launch, Men in Black 3 borrows that feeling of collective wonder and purpose and infuses it into its own story. The rocket going up becomes not just a historical moment, but a symbol of hope, the moment when, in the most secret possible way, everything was saved. Chapter 4. New York City as a cultural and historical character. Men in Black 3 uses two versions of New York City, the contemporary city and the 1969 city, as settings, and the contrast between them is itself a kind of cultural and historical commentary. The film's production design team worked extensively to differentiate the two New Yorks in ways that go beyond simply changing the cars and the clothing, creating two distinct visual and atmospheric worlds that reflect the different cultural moments they inhabit. The New York of the present day in Men in Black 3 is the New York that emerged from decades of transformation, a cleaner, safer, more expensive, more internationally connected city than the one that existed in 1969. The MIB headquarters beneath the city reflects this modernity, sleek, technologically sophisticated, efficiently organized, integrated into a global network of alien monitoring infrastructure. The city above ground is recognizably the contemporary New York of glass towers and congested streets, and a population that has learned, through long experience, not to be surprised by anything. The 1969 New York is a different creature entirely. It is dirtier, louder, more chaotic, and in many ways more alive with a certain kind of raw, unfiltered energy that the contemporary city has largely gentrified out of existence. Coney Island in 1969 was a working-class amusement park at the edge of a borough that had seen better days. A place of faded glamour and genuine seediness that was nevertheless beloved by the communities around it. The film captures this with considerable affection, using the location not just as a backdrop for an action sequence but as a genuine piece of New York cultural history. The alien community that lives undercover at the Coney Island Fairground is one of the film's most evocative world-building ideas. The notion that the margins and the outskirts of the city, the places that mainstream society ignores or overlooks, are exactly where alien beings would choose to make their homes, hiding in plain sight among the eccentric and the unusual. New York's relationship with immigration and outsider identity is one of the oldest and most defining aspects of its cultural character, and Men in Black has always drawn on this history. The city has been the point of entry for wave after wave of people who did not fit into the dominant culture of their time: Irish, Italian, Jewish, Chinese, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and countless other communities who built lives in the margins of a city that was simultaneously welcoming and hostile. The Men in Black universe extends this metaphor to its logical science-fictional extreme. Among all of these human communities of outsiders and newcomers, there are also alien communities, beings from across the galaxy who found in New York's density and diversity a place where they could disappear, where their strangeness would be absorbed into the general strangeness of a city that has always been too busy and too varied to stop and stare at any one unusual thing for very long. Chapter 5. Andy Warhol, Pop Art, and the 1960s Cultural Revolution. One of the most culturally specific and genuinely delightful details in Men in Black 3 is the revelation that Andy Warhol, the the most famous and influential visual artist of the 1960s and one of the defining figures of 20th century American culture, was in fact a man in black agent operating undercover within the New York art world. Bill Hader plays Warhol in a brief but memorable sequence, portraying him as a MIB agent who has adopted the persona of an eccentric avant-garde artist as cover for his actual activities, and who is deeply relieved when Jay and young Kay arrive and give him permission to abandon the persona. The joke works on multiple levels. Andy Warhol was genuinely one of the strangest and most inscrutable public figures of his era, a man who cultivated deliberate blankness and enigma as both an artistic strategy and a personal defense, who surrounded himself with an extraordinary cast of characters at his factory studio in New York, who seemed to exist at the intersection of art, commerce, celebrity, and underground culture in a way that no one before or since has quite replicated. He was, in the truest sense, someone who appeared to be operating by a completely different set of rules than everyone around him, and who never fully explained himself or his motivations to anyone. The suggestion that this was because he was actually an alien monitoring government agent rather than an artist is, when you think about it, almost as plausible as the truth. The 1960s cultural revolution that Warhol was central to was itself one of the most significant transformations in American cultural history. The decade saw a complete dismantling and reimagining of the relationship between high and low culture, between art and commerce, between the serious and the playful. Warhol was at the center of this transformation. His soup cans and Marilyn Monroe prints and factory films challenged every assumption about what art was, who it was for, and what it meant to be an artist. By inserting him into the Men in Black universe as a secret agent, the film is doing something genuinely funny with one of the most significant cultural figures of the century, suggesting that the most inexplicable aspects of his persona were not artistic choices at all but professional necessities. The sequence also reflects the film's broader interest in the idea that the strangest and most inexplicable aspects of human cultural history might have alien explanations. If Andy Warhol was actually a MIB agent, then the entire history of pop art looks slightly different, not a spontaneous cultural revolution emerging from the specific conditions of post-war American consumer society, but the artistic output of someone who needed a convincing cover identity and chose, for reasons best known to himself, to make it one of the most influential art movements of the 20th century. Chapter 6. Time Travel as a Cultural and Philosophical Theme. Time travel has been one of the most persistent and culturally resonant concepts in science fiction since H.G. Wells published The Time Machine in 1895, and Men in Black 3 uses it in a way that is aware of this long history and attempts to do something meaningful with it rather than simply deploying it as a plot convenience. The film's treatment of time travel is not primarily about paradoxes or mechanics. It does not dwell on the logical complications of changing the past in the way that more cerebrally oriented science fiction tends to do, but rather uses the concept to explore questions about memory, identity, legacy, and the relationship between the past and the present that are genuinely philosophical in their ambition. The character of Griffin is the film's most philosophically interesting engagement with the concept of time. Griffin can see all possible timelines simultaneously, every version of every event, every branching path that stems from every decision made by every person. This is presented not as a superpower but as a burden, a condition of perception so overwhelming that it requires a profound equanimity to survive. Griffin has learned to hold the infinite plurality of possible realities lightly, to appreciate the beauty of the specific timeline that actually exists without mourning the infinite others that did not come to pass. He is, in a sense, the film's philosopher, a being who has been forced by the nature of his existence to develop a relationship with contingency and uncertainty that most human beings never achieve. His observation that the miracle is not that things go wrong but that they ever go right, that in the infinite landscape of possible outcomes, the existence of any moment of beauty or connection or achievement is astonishing precisely because it did not have to happen, is one of the most genuinely moving philosophical ideas in any blockbuster film of the past decade. It reflects a tradition of thinking about contingency and possibility that runs through philosophy, literature, and religious thought across many cultures, and it gives the film's time travel premise an emotional and intellectual weight that elevates it considerably above the average use of the concept in commercial cinema. The film also engages with the more personal and psychological dimensions of time travel through Jay's experience of the past. When Jay arrives in 1969, he is not simply a tourist in history. He is confronting the actual circumstances that shaped his own life: the death of his father, the neuralization of his childhood self, the origin of his relationship with Agent K. He is experiencing, in real time, the events that made him who he is, and he has to watch them happen without being able to intervene or change them in any way that would alter his own existence. This is one of the oldest and most emotionally resonant themes in time travel fiction: the idea of being present at the formative events of your own life and being unable to change them, and the film handles it with a sensitivity and emotional intelligence that catches most audiences off guard. Chapter 7: The Men in Black Mythology and American Conspiracy Culture. The Men in Black as a cultural concept did not originate with the 1997 film. The idea of mysterious government agents in black suits who appear after UFO sightings and pressure witnesses into silence has been a part of American conspiracy culture since the early 1950s, when reports of such encounters began appearing in UFO investigation literature. The original Men in Black mythology emerged from the specific cultural anxieties of post-war America, a society that had just watched the development and use of nuclear weapons, that was living under the threat of Soviet nuclear attack, that had a government conducting classified military and intelligence operations on a scale never seen before, and that was beginning to receive the first widely publicized reports of unidentified flying objects in its airspace. The idea that the government knew more about these phenomena than it was telling the public, that there were agents specifically tasked with managing the flow of information about extraterrestrial contact, fit perfectly into the broader culture of Cold War secrecy and institutional distrust that characterized the period. The Men in Black of conspiracy culture were sinister figures, threatening, robotic, possibly not fully human, appearing uninvited and leaving witnesses frightened and disoriented. The film franchise transformed this sinister mythology into something comic and warm, turning the agents of secrecy into heroes rather than threats, but it retained the core premise: the government does know, and it is not telling you, and there are people whose entire professional lives are dedicated to making sure you never find out. Men in Black 3 operates within this mythology while also gently interrogating some of its assumptions. The neuralization that the MIB uses to wipe the memories of civilian witnesses to alien activity is presented throughout the franchise as a benevolent tool, a way of protecting ordinary people from knowledge that would destabilize their understanding of reality and their ability to live normal lives. But the film also shows the cost of this protection, most movingly in the scene where young K neuralizes the young J after his father's death. The neuralizer removes trauma, yes, but it also removes truth. It removes the knowledge of his father's heroism. It substitutes a comfortable fiction for a painful reality. The film asks, quietly, whether this is a kindness or a deprivation, and it does not fully answer the question, which is part of what makes the ending so rich and complex. This connects to a broader cultural conversation about the relationship between institutional secrecy and democratic citizenship. The premise of the Men in Black, that a secret government organization makes decisions about what the public is allowed to know and then enforces those decisions by literally altering people's memories, is, when examined without the comedy and the alien-chasing adventure, a genuinely troubling one. The film does not fully confront this troubling dimension, but it gestures toward it, and in doing so it acknowledges that the mythology it is drawing on carries real cultural weight, that the idea of Men in Black resonates with audiences not just because it is fun but because it speaks to genuine anxieties about power, knowledge, and the limits of what ordinary people are permitted to understand about the world they live in. Chapter 8. Legacy: What the film says about history, memory, and sacrifice. The deepest cultural and historical dimension of Men in Black 3 is ultimately about the relationship between individual sacrifice and collective memory, about the countless acts of courage and devotion that happen in the shadows of history, unrecorded and unacknowledged, that nevertheless make everything else possible. Colonel James Edwards Sr. dies at Cape Canaveral on the night of July 15, 1969. Protecting an agent of an organization he barely understands, in service of a planetary defense system whose existence will never be publicly acknowledged. He receives no medal. He receives no memorial. His name does not appear in any history book. The world he saves does not know he saved it, and will never know. This is, the film suggests, the condition of most genuine heroism. The events that shape history most profoundly are often not the ones that are recorded and celebrated, but the ones that happen in the dark, performed by people who will receive nothing for their sacrifice except the knowledge that they did the right thing when it mattered. The Men in Black themselves are a metaphor for this kind of unacknowledged service, people who give their lives to protecting a world that does not know they exist and cannot be told. This theme connects to the broader American cultural tradition of honoring military sacrifice and service, but it extends it into a more universal and more melancholy register. The film is not making a simple argument about patriotism or duty. It is making a more complex and more human argument about the nature of meaning itself, about whether an act of courage and sacrifice has value if no one ever knows it happened, and about whether the answer to that question is yes. Griffin's philosophy of gratitude and wonder, his insistence on the miracle of any good outcome in a universe of infinite possible bad ones, is the film's answer to this question. The fact that Colonel Edwards's sacrifice is unknown does not make it less real or less important. The fact that the ArcNet shield protects billions of people who have no idea it exists does not make the protection less real. What happened, happened. The timeline where the world was saved is the timeline that exists, and the people in it are alive and going about their ordinary days and feeling their ordinary feelings and making their ordinary choices, and all of that ordinary human life is the monument to a sacrifice that will never have a monument. Men in Black 3 is, at its deepest level, a film about this kind of invisible history, the history that exists in the gaps between the events that get recorded, carried in the memories of the people who were present and nowhere else, and eventually lost when those people are gone. It is a summer blockbuster and a sci-fi comedy and an action movie, and it is also, quietly and without making a fuss about it, one of the most thoughtful and genuinely moving engagements with history, memory, and the meaning of sacrifice that the franchise genre has ever produced.